Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone. This is Stacy Obrecht from the Capacity Building Center for Courts, and welcome to our call. We're going to be talking today about building a learning ecosystem or a learning environment that really hits at all different types of engagement. There will be some open space as well. So the agenda, if you're in the Adobe room, is up on the left. We're going to kind of go through the agenda. Welcome. We have some time for Jen or David or other CBCC staff to share any kind of CIP business. Then we'll be talking through how to create a learning ecosystem and kind of what that word means and what's the difference between that and training. I'll give you a sneak peek of some of the...
You want to call in? I'm trying to. Okay.
If you are not on mute, if you would put yourself on mute, that would be great. We're going to give you a sneak peek of some of the online learning stuff that we're working on for you around the safety guide, just to give you an idea of kind of what an online component of a learning ecosystem might look like. And then we'll have some open space for you all to talk to each other, or if you have any questions, we're available for questions as well. If you would please enter your name and kind of your role and your state in the chat box as you get into the room. And then we also have a poll down on the bottom right-hand corner just to get at kind of where we're starting from. So the question is, which option best describes your use case or your situation and really gets at kind of where you're at as far as developing training versus learning and kind of what level of that continuum you're on. So if you would take a moment to actually complete that poll, I'll have it be quiet for just a minute to give you a chance to think through that and type in your name. All right. Let's see. Jen, are you on? Is there anything that we need to talk about as far as CIP business today?
Yes. Hello, Stacy, and thanks, everyone. So just an update on the state team meeting. So it's April 23rd and 24th. We have received a number of questions about whether people can bring more than 6 people. We found out definitively last week that the answer to that question is no. So let me explain why. So you will be sitting for the majority of the time at a table with other team members. However, given the layout of the room, for any of the plenary sessions or any time there's someone in the front of the room speaking, we're going to be moving from the tables into a theater type room. So there's theater seating in that room. The problem is we are at max capacity with each state bringing 6 people. So if states bring extra people, then we literally won't have enough room in the room. It's a fire code issue, and other states will have to sit outside the room and not hear what's being said. So David, Kelly, and I apologize for being so heavy-handed about the 6-person limit, but that's where we are with that. I did speak with the logistics coordinator. She said there is one point person for each state through whom the registrations go. In other words, she's not emailing out the registration link to anybody. I know for the majority of the states that's you, the CIP coordinator. So you want to make sure that you send that out to the 5 other people that you plan on having attend the meeting with you. The other issue is the CIP meeting Monday night. David had sent out an email that would be from 4 to 6 p.m. at the hotel. He got some feedback asking to push the time back a bit later since the majority of the people will be traveling on the 22nd. He has not made a final call on that, so we're planning for now that the meeting will be from 4 to 6 p.m., and stay tuned if we bump that back to a little bit later. So what questions do you have about the state team meeting?
Jen, it's Rob Shelley from Arizona. I had held off on reaching out to DCS because the initial correspondent, our Child Welfare Agency, I apologize, the initial correspondence mentioned that there would be correspondence going out to the Child Welfare Agency, the prevention lead, and to us at the same time. And I don't think we got that correspondence yet, did we?
Let me put it this way, Rob. I saw a draft letter signed by Jerry Milner, and I do not know whether or not that was sent out to the agency leads. I know that the Children's Bureau was planning on doing that. I apologize. That piece of it, that being the invitation to the agency leads and the CB-CAT people, is out of my hands. I do know that that's the intention of the Children's Bureau, is to invite those people with a letter directly from Commissioner Milner.
Thanks.
There will be a piece, that does remind me, Rob, there will be a piece of the meeting focusing on the CFSP as an opportunity to integrate some of these collaborative processes and to work on, to also include some of the PIP strategies into the CFSP. So I do know that it's the Children's Bureau intention to invite people inside of the agency who have lead roles around the development and the implementation of the CFSP. Are there any other questions? Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Jen.
Okay, back to you, Stacy.
Thanks. Okay, so the purpose today is really to talk about designing, developing, and evaluating learning ecosystems. So when we usually think about training, we think about getting people together in a room or online to get information on a specific topic, usually from someone that knows that topic very well. And what we're going to push you to think about today is a little bit farther into kind of what does that learning environment look like, and how do we build a continuous kind of learning ecosystem that really helps support the learner all the time and not just on a one-off situation. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is just kind of what's the difference. So the difference between kind of a training and a learning ecosystem is that a training is usually one-off and topical based and usually has some sort of subject matter expert leading it or training at it. So this may be something that you do with a conference or a one-day event or a lunch hour grab bag, you know, a training event, something like that, that's really focused on a new initiative or something that you've identified that needs kind of an improvement in the way practice is, and so you're going to train on it. What we're talking about when we mention a learning ecosystem is really an entire learning environment in which someone kind of lives and moves and seeks out knowledge. So it's a space or kind of a network of things that have come together to create an experience. So it's not a one-off thing aimed at developing one skill or acquiring some sort of knowledge, but really about finding a space or an area where things come together and are populated by lots of different types of experiences that can include training, but isn't limited to just training. So the idea here of a thinking as a CIP about a learning environment and a learning ecosystem is that you should think of training as part of kind of a broader vision for professional development for the people that you're working with, whether those are the attorneys or the judges or the entire system if you're involved in multidisciplinary stakeholder training, but that really it's part of this kind of learning ecosystem in which they can develop their abilities in lots of different ways and using kind of many different teaching modalities. And we're going to walk through some examples here. So the most important thing is about seeing the big picture, right? So we're going to go through some core principles and how you develop your learning ecosystem. And the first one is to really try to avoid these disconnected one-off trainings. We see a lot of CIP programs that are working on these, and they're hot topics and they're important, but they're not really tied to anything else. And so they're not bad in and of themselves, but if they're the only things offered or if they're alone kind of in how we're working on those topical areas or working on those skills, they're really not enough to improve a learner's performance on a large scale. So they're not moving the needle on practice any, and we're not changing any sort of behaviors or habits. Instead, if you can look at and decide in this big picture what this learning ecosystem for your CIP would look like and build it and populate it with a lot of different variety of learning experiences, including more traditional trainings, but also other things as well, you'll have a better likelihood of, one, engaging the person that you're trying to affect and also in moving the needle on practice. The next kind of core principle around learning ecosystems is thinking longitudinally. And really kind of thinking about this in two ways. First, as the learner grows, and also as the program grows. So first, when you're looking at learners' growth, you want to be really purposeful in kind of how you design and measure whether that practice or performance improves as a result of interacting with your ecosystem or your learning experiences. So this means that you really need to evaluate learner performance over time and be really intentional upfront as you're designing this work as to how you're going to measure their performance before they interact with some piece of your environment, and then after as well, and then long-term down the road. And then on the second piece of thinking longitudinally is about your program and how it grows, is you need to have a plan in place to evaluate each piece of that ecosystem. So you can identify what works and what doesn't, and you can do more of what works, and you can tinker with what doesn't. So if you find out that the kind of hot topic, lunch hour trainings are working for you, you can do more of them. And if you find out they're not, then you can find a new way to kind of engage that learner and present that information in a different way, maybe having it online or having it on a webinar or having it in a tip sheet that goes out, lots of different modules and options for that, but you can at least identify that it's not working for your population. And the point is for this one is that you really want to think about evaluation at the beginning and think about it long term so that you can make sure that what you're spending your time, energy, and funds on is really efficient and working well. So last, kind of third core principle is understanding adult learners. And we're all adult learners, so you all come to this with your own capacity for understanding what this means. I don't know how many of you have kind of sat through the typical learning experience where either someone's talking at you for multiple hours or they're reading slides that are on a PowerPoint, and we all have various experiences with those. We can oftentimes point to what doesn't work very quickly. So just a reminder to think about that as a learner as you're sitting in the audience when you're developing training and developing these learning experiences that you really want to design for the adult learner. There's a lot online around kind of what this looks like. There's a good blog out there called Principles of Adult Learning Theory on online Rutgers, if you want to look at that. But really there's some main key points. First one is that the adults need to be involved in planning their learning and evaluating their response. So they should be provided with an environment where they can make some mistakes, try it out, and kind of continually learn and also kind of come to the kind of problem-centered approach with new ideas. So they're bringing something to the table as well and not just coming in to sit and listen. Also, for the most part, kind of as adults, we have a very little time to learn things just to learn them. We're all on kind of various continuums of this, so some of us like it more than others, but we're busy, right? And so we're interested in finding tasks and approaching tasks that are directly related to what we do in our occupation. And so in order to kind of make this work in a learning environment, you have to be really clear on how everything that you're doing fits into their goals and kind of where they're headed in their development and also in their advancement in their career. Tim, thanks for sharing that link. So the link that I talked about from Rutgers is Tim just shared in the chat box for those that need it. And then the last one is just from kind of children when they start are really kind of conditioned to look at a teacher or educator as kind of an authority figure who has like all this knowledge and will kind of tell them what to do and share that knowledge with them. But as adults, we really don't come to a learning environment with that context. We come to expect that even kind of the most experienced or the most credentialed expert will kind of be a partner to us in our learning, that they're going to come with maybe some knowledge or some nuggets that I'm going to take, but I also come with some knowledge and nuggets that I might share, and to really think about that as you're designing your environments. So just a quick kind of breakdown or recap of kind of the differences when we talk about a learning ecosystem versus a training. This is kind of what we walked through, but really what we're talking about is finding things that you can return to and learn from, that they're very comprehensive and not just on kind of a hot topic or one thing. and that it's really focused on developing performance and that you can measure and evaluate because that's occurring with what you're building. So this is, I'm hoping you can see it enough on your screen. Hopefully you can zoom in if you can't, but this is just an infographic that kind of walks through different modes in a learning ecosystem. So you have everything from kind of your traditional either documents or video all the way up to things that are just like web, right? So how many times have we just used searching on the web or internet sites or something like that in order to learn something? So it's walking through all kinds of different things and really shows you how different it can be. So we start on the traditional, which is I think what we see most often. The next one is kind of self-paced. So this is where you have either simulations or something on the web or a web app that actually walks you through, but you get to do it on your own terms and your own time. So you may decide to walk through kind of half of one module today or half of one module tomorrow, or it may just be something that you read and look at from time to time, but it's when you need it, it's there and ready to go. The next one is live kind of training events where you either have kind of in a physical classroom or hands-on training. You may do mentoring. I don't know how many of you guys have mentoring programs through your bar association, but these are ideas here. You can also do these kind of typical live things in a virtual environment as well. And then we have social learning, which I think is kind of growing more and more these days, but how do you have something, it's similar to the CIP listserv, but maybe a little bit more active, kind of discussion groups, places where you can find an expert. The communities of practice that we run through the CBCC fit in this world. And also, anytime that you're getting adult learners involved in kind of creating their own learning things. So we come together, and this has happened, I know, in a lot of the communities of practice for the CBCC, where they come in, we say, this is a need that we need, and the group works on creating something to fit that need together. So they're learning as they go, and you have both experienced and new practitioners that are involved in kind of generating that information. And then as we talked about kind of at the top, you've got the web and you're kind of externally looking for things or finding things on your own. It's always at your fingertips that you're kind of responsible for searching and finding the right thing. All right, so here's just kind of some different components that might be part of your ecosystem. And so it might be interesting for you to think about what you offer from your CIP program as far as learning environments. So the first one is traditional. A lot of times these are like handbooks or guidebooks or training manuals for attorneys and judges in court or how they operate in the system. The second one is usually online courses, but they're anything that's kind of self-paced. If you're generating an app or a simulation, but oftentimes I think we see a lot of online courses in this area. The third is live, and the most common one here is classroom-based live training. The fourth is social feeds, forums, this could also be, again, some of the communities of practice or something there where you're kind of pulling from a group of people. Web-based searches and inquiries. And then we had kind of an others, if there are other ways that you're creating spaces to interact with content or other things that you've seen even if you aren't doing it. We wanted to just open this up and see if there were any other ideas that you had. And feel free to either put it in the chat or speak up on the phone, either way. Anyone feel comfortable sharing a bit of what they're doing most of, whether it's kind of traditional or live or web-based? And again, you can do it in the chat or speak up on the phone line, but just wondering what you guys are doing most of. Yeah, it looks like lots of live training. Yeah. Yeah, I would say from my exposure to the States, I see a lot of live training and then some traditional. It's great to see some other web and socials on there as well, though. Oh, great, Catherine. A website for long-distance learners. That's great, especially in our bigger states. All right. Well, so I guess what I would leave you with here is just to think through and kind of be more strategic and kind of what you're offering and thinking about what this ecosystem could look like for your state, where you're heavy on and where you're light on, and maybe there are some places that you could add in some learning environments in some of these areas where you aren't focusing on, and really kind of bring it into a kind of a package for your learners and think through what that might look like, and then start to evaluate and see what works best for them. You may find that the thing that you're spending most of your time and energy and funds on isn't working very well, and maybe if you change to a different option, it might work a lot better. So. Okay, and then the last little plug is just a reminder that we are available to help you think through kind of your training and your learning ecosystem. So if you want some support in this or in evaluating kind of what you have or where you're headed, please reach out to your liaison. We can help work on some of this. Some examples are up there on your screen. For those of you that are on the phone, we can help with things like consulting on developing courses, online course templates, blended learning, program assessments for your training, curriculum review, and then actual tool design. And then if you'll bear with me for a moment, I'm going to bring up we are right now working on an online learning course for the safety guide for judges and attorneys. So I'm going to show you what I mean and kind of how this fits in what we talked about today. You get both a sneak peek and also an example of kind of the language that we've been using as we talk about a learning ecosystem. Okay, so here is, again, and this is not done, this is in development. So Andy said I could share it, but he wanted me to make sure that you all know that this is not a finalized product. You'll notice when you look at the wording and stuff, but I wanted to use it as a example of kind of an asynchronous learning environment, because a lot of you have seen this template before that is kind of available to be used by CBC or by CIPs, but it's really meant to allow the learner to self-pace and come back to it and also choose to go in different directions. So in this one, I'm going to begin the course, and as you may or may not have seen before, you have the ability to test out. So if I come into this and I know this is something I know really well, or I've been to a live training on it before, or I do it every day and I've already learned it on the job and I really don't need to kind of learn more information about it, I can literally just click here, answer some questions, test out, and be done with it. And as an adult learner, we want to do that, right? Because we don't want to sit through anything, whether it's live or online, about something that we've already kind of become an expert in or know very well. But let's say you're not ready to test out and you need to learn something about this information, you click here, and then rather than kind of forcing you through a step-by-step or slide-by-slide training, you get to kind of pick where you want to start. So I may want to start here, but I may also want to start here because that's a topic that interests me more or something I don't know a lot about in the first I did. And so I can click there, kind of go through, look at it, and then actually go back to that and decide to come back here and click through that one. And so just kind of a reminder that allows me to kind of get to this when I need to. I may want to come back to this, let's say before I go into court and I have a question about that. I'm going to make a decision about it or make a recommendation to a judge. And then I'm also allowed to do it kind of in whatever order or time frame that works best for me. And that's the benefit of kind of web-based or online training that you don't usually get with live training. The kind of closest we get to that with live is having breakout sessions so that I can choose kind of what topic I want to focus my learning on that day. But just a good example. So the takeaways from this is just that you should be kind of building learning environments, and online is an option and one piece of that. It's not the only one, but it is one, and that we do have some tools available to help, and this is just a good sample and a sneak peek of something that once it's done, you'll all have access to and be able to use with your learners. Okay, so I'm going to switch back, and the next thing we have is really just kind of a sharing, an open space. If you have questions, if there are resources you want to share, or stories or information that you want to share with each other, we're just going to open it up for the group. So feel free to put anything on chat or speak up on the phone line, either way. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so if you are on mute, feel free to press *6 and that will unmute you. Has anyone done anything that's more kind of group discussion or kind of community practice based and less of kind of what we see mostly, which is kind of traditional live or web-based e-learning? Would they be willing to share what they're doing?
I can speak up from Washington if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
In Washington, partly because we were influenced by your man Tim there, we do a lot of learning within a multidisciplinary group work at the county-based level, what we call tables of 10. And we do a lot of examining the purpose of our work, the purpose of why we come together to improve the system, looking at data and talking with each other about how the system needs to be improved, looking at initiatives out of that, then in part looking at learning to build new practices around those initiatives, then looking at ways to measure, try and drive practice change and measure whether that's happening. The latter part of that sentence is the part that is the most difficult, in large part because of capacity, spreading ourselves around the state. And it's also stuff that we're doing some work thinking on about building efficiency around that implementation and measurement part.
Great. And from what I know of the tables of 10, it's also connected to the data, the local data, right? So everything that those teams are working on are connected to the issues that they're facing in their locale.
Yeah, we have a pretty rigorous database system in Washington around our child welfare courts and agency that we use to both assess the system and then try and set up markers that we use to track practice improvement.
Great. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else doing anything a little different or unique that they might be willing to share?
This is Kathy in Nevada. In 2009, in response to the second round of CFSRs and the resultant PIP, Nevada created what we call community improvement councils, probably similar to the tables of 10. For the same kind of reason. Each jurisdiction is very different, and they might have similar issues, but the root cause for the issues would be different, and oftentimes solutions would be different. And annually, we conduct a CIC, Community Improvement Council Summit, where they all come together. They create an action plan for the upcoming year. All that come together are Community Improvement Council teams led by the judge, the predominant judge in the Neglect and Abuse Court. And we present data that's been either from studies, statewide studies, individual studies. They each quarterly receive their their individual jurisdiction data to help them identify how they're improving, if they're improving. Recently, we had the second of a hearing quality, statewide hearing quality conducted. The baseline was done in 2014, and the judges and all the stakeholders, PDs, DAs, et cetera, CASA, were all very excited to find out how they had improved, if they had improved, and where they need to continue to improve. We also then noticed that the judges tended to congregate and want to just talk, and so before everyone else gathers for the summit, we have what we call a judges roundtable. Those have been so successful that now the judges wish to have quarterly judges roundtables, not in person because the distances are quite long in Nevada, but so we're doing those virtually.
Remote. Yeah. Awesome. That's great. And so was there a change in practice? Did the data move? I'm curious. Did it move?
Oh,
Did it
yeah.
improve?
It really moved.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, what you just said is a good answer to what Catherine asked, which is kind of how do you track or evaluate that change. And I think there's lots of different ways to do it depending on what you're trying to measure. Oh, there you go, Alicia. Thanks. But I know some have done it with surveys, some have done it with observation tools. I don't know, Alicia Summers, if you have other ways, but there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of measure that or evaluate that down the road.
Yeah, well, I'll just jump in really quick in terms of training evaluations. I think it's a challenge for everyone to get beyond your basic kind of satisfaction surveys, which have a good purpose, but they're not always what we'd like to get to. And starting, depending on your resources, with something fairly resource-light, like looking at pre-post surveys to gather knowledge or pre-post surveys to understand behavior change or decision-making changes from the beginning to the end of a training are a good way to start looking at what happens in these cases and what people have got out of it and how they're applying it. So it's kind of a first step, and the second step being how do we know that their behaviors actually change? To do that, you kind of need a sense of how you think their behavior should change, which you should get from your theory of change about your training, but something that tells you what you expect to see, and then you can develop ways to track that. One way is to have people do logs or fill out how often they do certain things. Another way is to survey the community, people involved, to see if they indicate that they're seeing this more often in practice or if they've noticed a change or what those changes are. So there's some broad ways to do that. And the most probably robust way is to actually observe behavior. You can do that. We've done it successfully in the past with court observation, particularly with judges, looking at how they interacted in the hearings prior to a training and after a training. To do that, of course, you need permission from the judges. Recorded hearings are always helpful, and then a list of who was at the training so that you can identify who's had training at what point and moving forward. The next step, trying to get to outcomes, is even harder in the process. How do you know if that actually results in a significant change? And the best we can do so far that I've seen done in the field is try to do these attitude, knowledge, skills, behavior change pieces, and then look long-term in those jurisdictions or specifically for those judges and see if their outcomes improve over time or if they improve more than other judges in the jurisdiction who've not participated. So I realize that's a ton of very fast-talking information. Feel free to outreach to any of us at CDCC for additional information. We're happy to talk this through with you and help you figure out and design training evaluation that best meets your needs.
Thanks, Alicia. So the other question I had that I wanted to put into this open space was kind of what do you see as the biggest barriers for you in getting away from more traditional or live training? So I'm curious if it is kind of, Catherine, it looks like you have one is trying to figure out how to evaluate it or measure it. But I know I've also heard kind of some barriers around time or funding or those types of things. I'm curious what you think it is. I also know that just in general, as attorneys being your audience, they have a harder time, I think, getting outside of the box. And some of them do sometimes just want to come and check out and sit in a room for an hour or a couple hours. So yeah, knowing what kind of those barriers are would help us in kind of meeting your needs as well. And feel free to speak up on the line or put it in the chat, whichever's easiest for you.
In Washington, I'll speak up again from Washington because we found some significant barriers in the sense of, doing a standalone training is easier within short capacity, right? It also is calculated not to produce the results. Supporting a multidisciplinary group, thinking about your system, embedding training and other learning type environments within a purpose-driven environment that seeks to drive actual behavior change and measure it is but a big part of it is resources to manage that process. And like I said earlier, that's one of the things we're struggling with in Washington, and trying to make it more efficient and develop some tools that can make it a lighter touch management process, so that it can be done, because usually you're asking somebody in your group to do it within existing resources. And so that's a big piece.
I'm curious if you don't mind sharing what those tools are. Is it kind of training up and getting someone locally to help manage it, or is it doing it all from the state level, kind of at the CIP program, or what are you finding might help lower the resource load?
Well, the problem that we found was that, at CIP centrally, we're just a couple of people. And so being sort of the management person across many counties was really prohibitive. Locally, then, having some sort of partial FTE available from somewhere that can be in a management sort of process-minded way is helpful, but it's often the case that doesn't exist. We have a program in Washington, the Family and Juvenile Court Improvement Program, which is a state kind of CIP thing, and they've put coordinators in several counties, and that's super helpful because part of their job can be to be mindful of that. And then so what we're trying to do from the central CIP place is to develop tools that they can use to do that, so that it's still more efficient. We're doing so. We obviously, as you know, use a lot of liberating structures, and we're embedding those in a little bit of sort of agile project management sort of thinking, not lifting it directly, but trying to do some project management cadence and stuff like that to help drive stuff forward.
Great. Thanks for sharing. So it looks like Andrea and Karen, you shared kind of what I would imagine would be a barrier, is just the reluctance of your audience to either kind of engage in that open collaborative discussion or to use some more web-based or higher tech tools. Are others finding that an issue, or have you found a way around that? I'm curious on that topic. Being an attorney myself and sitting in a room asking other attorneys to do stuff is usually a little scary if you don't want a room full of silence. I know the states that have done what Nevada and Washington are talking about, there's quite a few that have similar type local efforts. I haven't heard any of them talk about not being able to get the judges and attorneys to the tables, although I have heard some early issues with some reluctance in having to kind of educate and talk about what you're working on and get over some of those barriers. But once they usually get there, I think it's pretty darn successful. But I know that that's a little different when you just get them into a room with a whole bunch of people from across the state they don't know. So it could be kind of how you structure that, whether that's at a local level with people they work with day in, day out, or trying to do that at like a statewide conference or something like that. Anyone have any tips or tricks to get around some web-based tool, either fatigue or fear?
this is Kathy Malzahn Basson in Nevada, but I was going to mention something around pulling together and getting judges and attorneys to come together and to talk about their problems together. Originally, we seated all the community improvement councils around tables on their own, so they were teamed, just as we are at the national convenings. And now they've gotten, in the last several years, they want to be together with their teams. They want to discuss their issues and begin to identify solutions. But they also now want to group together, and sometimes they've asked, similar to the Judges Roundtable, attorneys would all like to group together around a certain subject, CASAs around another. And then we tried that last year, and it worked out fantastic around implementation thoughts for families first. Another thing that we've done in terms of data is to share the data. We created these poster boards, almost like a giant scrapbook page, and especially the judges, but many of the other stakeholders spend an incredible amount of time wandering the room, comparing their stats to other stats, and then they go over and talk to somebody. Well, you got 100% in holding your permanency hearings timely. How did you do that? And it's really become quite a collaborative effort throughout the entire state, and they do reach out to each other on their own as well.
That's great. It's like sharing your report cards.
Right.
Love it. All right. Well, any other questions or comments or things anyone wants to share? All right. Well, we'll give you a few minutes left in your day. If you don't mind, if you're in the room answering the kind of satisfaction poll questions Alicia mentioned that we do use and help to drive kind of how we create the learning environment for you for the next month. If you do that on your way out, that would be really great. And thanks all for your time, and I'll still be on for the next couple minutes if there's anything else that people want to chat about on the chat or on the phone. Have a great week.